They say there are some ghosts that don't rattle chains or walk the hills at night. Some hauntings come in the form of discord. And down in Hart County, Kentucky, there's a church where the air still feels uneasy, where every argument, every whisper, and every door that creaks open during Sunday service feels like Mary Edwards might still be listening. Because back in 1813, she wasn't just another neighbor. She was the woman the town nearly damned as a witch. Welcome, folks. You're listening to Kentucky Melody, where the legends of these hollers still walk among us. So, pull up close to the fire, folks, hit that subscribe button, and join us for tonight's tale, the witch trial of Mary Edwards. Now, it was the summer of 1813, back when Kentucky still had wild edges you could get lost in. The woods was thick and close, the roads was little more'n wagon ruts twisting through hollers, and the nearest neighbor might be a good half-day's ride if your horse didn't spook at something watching from the tree line. Down near the barren Hart County line stood a humble meeting house folk called Bear Wallow Church. Whitewashed boards, one creaky bell tower, and a graveyard out back where the weeds grew high and the ground stayed soft year-round. Every Sunday morning, families come rattling in with their wagons, Bibles tucked close, and young'uns scrubbed half raw, ready to sing, pray, and, well, talk about whoever weren't there. See, Bear Wallow folks were God-fearing, but they had long memories and sharper tongues, and in that summer heat, with crops dying and bellies growling, words had a way of twisting mean. That's when the name Mary Edwards started sliding through them pews like a chill draft. Mary was a widow woman, tall as a fence post and sharp-eyed as a hawk. Kept to herself mostly. Some said she talked low to her hens like they was old friends. Others swore they'd seen her out back under a full moon, picking herbs and humming songs that weren't fit for church folk to hear. Her little patch of ground, Lord, it never withered. While her neighbor's corn turned to dust, hers stood tall and green, whispering in the night wind like it knew a secret. At first, folks just muttered, "Odd woman," they'd say, strange ways. But come harvest time, when the blight rolled through and laid waste to near every field, their mutters turned darker. Then came the sickness. Children took fever. Livestock died with no reason. And through it all, Mary's smoke still curled from her chimney, steady as ever, her chickens fat, her well never dry. And that's when the whispering changed to something else entirely. Fear. Now, it all started the way most witch tales do, real quiet and mean as bad luck. There was a young girl in the settlement, Sarah Phelps, barely 16, with hair the color of dry corn silk and lungs weak as paper. She'd took sick come midsummer, coughing near every night. Her ma said she went up to Mary Edwards' place looking for one of them tonics the widow made from roots and herbs she grew under the moon. Mary gave her a little brown bottle, told her to sip it come nightfall, and Sarah did. That same night, she woke screaming. Said she'd seen shadows, tall black shapes moving outside her window, staring in without eyes. Claimed she heard scratching under her bed, like claws dragging across the boards. Her pa found her pale as milk, shivering though the fire was still burning. Come morning, her fever shot high as a summer blaze, and she kept whispering Mary's name between her fits. By sundown, her family had gone straight to the preacher, swore that the widow'd laid a spell on their girl, and once one person says witch, well, it don't take long for others to remember their own troubles. Old Caleb Miller said his milk cow went dry right after Mary walked past his fence line. Jeb Cartwright claimed his hounds wouldn't cross her field, just sat there whining, tails tucked, like they smelled something not meant for this world. Even the children started singing little rhymes about her, the kind that make grown folks' skin crawl. Didn't take but a week before the men of Bear Wallow decided enough was enough. The church elders called a meeting, not at the courthouse, mind you, but right there in the Lord's own house. They said they'd hold a church trial to see whether Mary Edwards was walking in the ways of God or dancing in step with the devil himself. That Sunday, Bear Wallow Church was packed tighter than a tick on a hound. Men stood shoulder to shoulder, arms crossed tight, like they was holding in judgment itself. Women clutched their hymn books to their chests like shields, eyes darting between the pulpit and the door. Even the young uns, who'd been told to stay home, peeked out from behind their mamas' skirts, too curious to be scared, but scared all the same. The air was thick with heat and breath, and the smell of sweat and lamp oil hung heavy. Outside, thunder was rumbling somewhere off in the hills, as if the Lord himself was listening. Then the church door creaked open. Mary Edwards stepped inside, slow and calm as a woman going to her own funeral. She wore a faded black shawl tight round her shoulders, her gray hair pinned neat beneath her bonnet. Her boots echoed off the floorboards, steady and sure. She didn't tremble, didn't weep, just lifted her head and looked around that room, at faces she'd known all her life, neighbors, folks she'd fed in lean times, and her own preacher staring down at her from behind the pulpit like he didn't even know her name. Mary spoke quiet, but her voice carried to the rafters. "You all know me. You know my hands. You know my heart." A murmur rippled through the crowd, uneasy as wind through dead leaves. But fear don't listen to reason. Once it sets in, it twists a good man's soul same as rot in the root of a tree. They questioned her for hours, voices rising, tempers flaring. Why'd she hang herbs in her window? Why'd her garden stay green when everyone else's failed? Why'd that old black cat of hers never leave her porch, just sit there watching, eyes glinting like coals in the dark? Mary's answers came plain and sharp. "Because I tend to what's mine." But when the preacher himself asked the hardest question, if she'd ever spoken to the devil, Mary lifted her chin just a hair and said, "No more than you've spoken to him in your prayers, against me." A hush fell so deep you could hear the storm outside moving closer, the wind moaning through the cracks in the boards. Some folks swore they saw a flicker then, like a shadow slid across the floor behind her, crawling up the wall and vanishing near the cross. Others said she smirked when she spoke, just the faintest curl of her mouth, as if she knew something they didn't. And right then, even the bravest man in that church felt a shiver crawl up his spine. When all was said and done, the church elders couldn't find nothing that stuck. No charms, no devil marks, no witness brave enough to swear on the good book they'd seen her do a thing unnatural. So they said Mary Edwards was innocent, leastways in the eyes of man. But forgiveness, that's a different matter. A stain like that don't wash clean, no matter how hard you pray. Some folks walked out of that meeting house saying justice had been served, that the Lord had tested their faith, and they'd passed. Others muttered that Satan had pulled the wool clean over their eyes, that he'd stood right there in that church, hiding behind Mary's calm face and quiet words. From that day on, Bear Wallow weren't never the same. Neighbors quit talking. Women crossed the road rather than meet Mary's eyes. Children ran when her shadow touched the ground near 'em. And come Sunday morning, half the congregation sat stiff and silent, while the other half stayed home, claiming they'd not stepped foot in a place the devil'd walked. By winter's first frost, it was done. Bear Wallow Church split clean in two. One group took their hammers and saws down the road and raised their own meeting house, saying the old one was cursed by deceit. They said you could hear it, how the rafters creaked like groaning bones each night, how the windows would shudder even when there weren't no wind. The preacher himself lasted only a spell longer, said the spirit had left that place and he couldn't preach where heaven had turned its back. After he left, the old church just waited. Empty pews, broken glass, and a pulpit that gathered dust. Some say if you pass by on a stormy night, you can still hear a woman's voice from inside. Low, steady, and whispering words no living soul can quite make out. As for Mary Edwards, she stayed right there on that patch of land till her dying day. Never took another husband, never darkened the door of any church again. Folks said she lived quiet but proud, keeping her fences mended and her garden green, even when the frost bit hard. Some nights they'd see a lantern glow moving slow across her fields, long after decent folk had gone to bed. When death finally came for her, she went peaceful, or so the neighbor woman said. They buried her out back, under that old wild plum tree, the roots twisting down through soil she'd tended her whole life. And come autumn, when the mist hangs low and the wind's got that sharp bite to it, folks still claim they hear church bells drifting through the holler from the direction of Mary's place. Only thing is, no bell ever hung there, not once. If you ever get brave enough to step inside what's left of the old Bear Wallow Church, you'll find it near swallowed by time. The boards gray and splintered, pews half rotted and sunk into the dirt. Ain't no bird's nest in the rafters and the air's heavy, like it remembers. There's no breeze, no sound, just that weight, like two sides of a quarrel still lingering, waiting for somebody to finish what got started over 200 years ago. Mary Edwards weren't burned, nor beaten, nor drowned like them poor souls up in Salem. No, her punishment cut deeper than any rope or flame could reach. She was forgotten by the living, but never forgiven by the dead whispers that lingered after her name. Folks stopped speaking of her outright, but her story never truly died. It just turned quiet, slipping through generations like a cold wind under the door, and for near on 200 years, that tale's been told across Kentucky of a woman judged not by the devil's work, but by the fear in her neighbors' hearts. A reminder that a church can split faster than dry kindling when fear takes hold, and that sometimes the truest curse don't come from witches at all. It comes from the ones swinging the torches. So, what do y'all think? Was Mary Edwards just a misunderstood woman ahead of her time, or did she truly know something the rest of Bear Wallow feared to even name? Have you ever heard stories like hers, old tales of witch women, or healers that folks turned on when times got hard? Share your thoughts down in the comments, and tell us if you'd have stood beside her, or if you'd have kept your distance once the church bells started ringing on their own. If you enjoyed this story, Be sure to like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you don't miss the next haunting tale from the hills of Kentucky. And if you'd like to help keep our lanterns burning and our stories flowing, consider joining our members, the Backwoods Believers, for early access, ad-free stories, and a few surprises from deep in the holler. Until next time, keep your heart kind, your fire warm, and remember, the past still whispers through these hills.